Hey everyone, welcome back to the ethical hacking course. So, the section we are going to check out now is the Learning Linux section. So, in this section, we'll be having a theoretical overview of the Linux operating system, why we are going to use it, and get some basic understanding of the command line and the commands used in it. So, let's move on. So, first of all, what is Linux? Well, if we go by the definition, Linux is just an operating system, as is Windows and iOS and Mac and Android. In fact, fun fact, Android runs on the base of a Linux operating system. So, yes, that can be the reason that's why Linux is called the most popular operating system in the world, because Android is the most popular mobile operating system in the world. Maybe in comparison to iOS, it may not be that popular, but there are much more Android phones in the world than there are iOS phones. So, yeah, other than that, Linux can also be found in cars, supercomputers, home appliances, or home desktops. So, you see, the reason of the benefit of using Linux is that it is scalable like anything. You may see Windows in a server or in a desktop computer at maximum, but Linux can be used inside a small computer like a Raspberry Pi or in microcontrollers for Wi-Fi adapters, or even a big systems as supercomputers that are used to crunch huge numbers of data like weather prediction servers and systems of that capacity. So yeah, also Linux is the basis on which the whole internet runs. So basically every server in the world runs on Linux, every DHCP server, DNS server. Don't worry if you don't understand these terms, we'll be looking at them later in the course. But for the general clarification of why we are using Linux, the basis is that Linux is basically the operating system of everything except the desktop computers. So Windows has a big market share on the desktop operating system market, but other than that, Linux is the king. Also, Linux is also used to run on the stock exchange computers. As you may realize, stock exchange is a highly time sensitive activity. So, Linux is the only operating system which is light, fast, and scalable, which can be used in those situations. So, moving on. Well, here are some more reasons personally for you why you should use Linux, or why hackers use Linux, or why security professionals use Linux. Well, first of all, it's open source. What do I mean by open source? Well, to understand open source, we can understand that the every line of code that is run inside the operating system is visible to everyone and anyone on the internet. Anyone can look at those and understand what it is doing and change it as they please. For example, there are two options. You may get a second-hand car from a small dealer, and you can look under the hood and change the engine, change the tires, or change the engine oil, or change anything or any part you want as you wish, as you like. So it gives freedom for the people who have the hobby of updating their cars and keeping them alive for longer. That is why the hobbyist and enthusiast market thrives on the ability to look inside and change things. This also increases the longevity of the devices. Well, Linux is just like that. Unlike Windows, in Windows you can't see any operating system code, or even Microsoft won't let you, and you are bound by their terms and you are bound by their code by which they write. If you want to add a feature in Windows, you have to wait for Windows to add it. The maximum you can do is add a suggestion. But if you want to have a feature in Linux, well, if you are skilled enough, you can add it in your own. And that is how this operating system works and thrives. It thrives on the basis of its community. People love it, people use it, and people add options to it. People code for it, people add, new features to it. That is why Linux is so scalable and so popular. Well, the second point is transparent. What do I mean by transparent? Well, if you use a Windows computer, you may have heard of the application known as the Task Manager. Well, you may see that, yeah, I can see what is running inside the computer once I run the Task Manager. But you really don't know what extra services are running behind the Task Manager, all right? That is the real deal. What is running the task manager? You cannot ever see that. In Linux, it is totally transparent. Every line of code it is as executed, you can look into it and see what is happening. You can monitor every process and applications that is running in the foreground or in the background of your operating system. That is why it is used by hackers, because as a hacker, you should have total compatibility and control over your operating system. As a hacker, you should understand how an operating system works, how files move inside the file system, how system calls are made, or how softwares are run. In order to understand everything in such detail, you need to use Linux because Linux gives you the ability to look into it, peek behind the curtains and take a look how everything is working. Moving on to the third reason, Linux is free. It was free and it will absolutely be free in the future. If you want, you can take a Linux operating system and do some changes and sell it if you want. That is what the open source license gives the freedom of you to you. You can make changes in it and you can sell it if you want. But majorly, all Linux operating systems are free. Any company that uses them is free. So yeah, Windows may charge you for using their desktop operating system, but in reality, in their backend servers, they are using Linux, which is free. What is the next point? It's highly customizable. Well, as I told you before, let's take the car example again. If you could look into the car hood and change everything you wanted, well, you could customize the car as specific to your needs as you wanted. That is the another benefit of using Linux for hackers, because you can tailor your operating system as you wish. I understand there are customizability options in, Windows. Well, you can change the wallpaper, you can change the theme, the mouse size, font, etc., etc., etc. But what if, you wanted to do some system level changes? What if I do not want a Wi-Fi driver in my operating system? Although how weird that may sound, maybe I don't need it. Maybe I don't want to have the start menu. Maybe I don't want to have network sharing in my operating system. In Windows, you can't disable any of that. In Linux, you can. You can disable and enable everything and everything as you please. The tool compatibility, moving on. So what do I mean by tool compatibility? Well, if you are imagine you're a carpenter, right? And as you join the carpenter school, you see everyone using the tools of the same company. But there comes another company that comes to you and says, hey, we have better tools and you can use them. But the problem is you can't use those tools everywhere. You have to use those tools specifically with the tools that the company provided. That is unlike Linux. That is unlike Linux, because in Linux, there is high tool compatibility. Every tool that a hacker uses is mostly made for Linux. Maybe then again made for Windows, but mostly made for Linux. 95% of the hacking tools that you're going to find are going to be found in Linux. In fact, most of them won't even have a mouse click button operation. You will have to use the terminal for that. What do I mean by the terminal? We'll look into it just in the next slides before I cover the last point. So yeah, what is the last point? The last point is omnipresent. Well, Linux is everywhere. So once you learn it, you can use it anywhere and everywhere. If you use Windows and you hack into a server, well, the server won't be running Windows, so you won't know what to do with it. But if you learn Linux, you can hack anything from Wi-Fi routers to operating systems to mobile phones, Androids, cars, smartphones, servers, anything. And Linux kernel is the same everywhere. So it gives you the ability to have the power to control and change systems anywhere and everywhere you want. Moving on. So I talked about the terminal before. Let me tell you what is the terminal. Well, the terminal is just a box, a window, similar to the command prompt if you have seen it in Windows. If not, we'll be looking into the Linux terminal, moving on, and we'll be making good use of it. So this is just a basic overview of a terminal parts. So as you can see on number 1, you have the window decorations, basically the close, minimize and maximize buttons, just like any other program. Then we have the shell prompt. Well, the shell prompt is basically the prompt which tells you the current status of your terminal. It gives you your username, your host name, etc. And there you can enter the commands that you wish. And the third point just shows the empty prompt, where you can see you can enter new commands to execute. When you see the dollar symbol and a blank line ahead of it, that means you can execute your commands there. If you see a dollar and a command next to it, that means that command has been executed. Moving on. So why the terminal? I understand that you may say, okay, that I will use Linux if you say so, because every tool is compatible. Then I tell you to use terminal and you're like, why should I use the terminal? Why should I not use the graphical user interface? Well, as every one of you may have been accustomed to the Windows graphical user interface of point and click using the mouse, the honest truth is that text-based input in the terminal is much faster, advanced, and easier to use. But the problem with it is that it requires a higher learning curve from anyone coming from any desktop operating system, because everyone is used to the mouse and keyboard combo of clicking things and dragging things and right-clicking things. In the terminal, we usually don't use the mouse. We just use the keyboard for everything. And we type everything that we want to make the operating system do. It's basically more like a direct connection between you and the operating system. You type on the keyboard and you tell the system what you want it to do, what tools you want it to use, and etc. etc. The benefit of using terminal over graphical UI is given here. I would just brief it that it is highly configurable and customizable because you can make sure that the terminal works as you like. Imagine if you want the minimize buttons on the Windows operating system to be present in the middle of the ribbon top bar instead of the top right. Well, you can't really change that, can you? But in a terminal, you can change everything you want. So moving on, the terminal is faster and quicker. Well, obviously, you may not realize it now because it will take time for you to learn. But once you are, once you are used to it, you will realize how faster it is using a terminal than using a mouse and click point operation. Well, moving on. So some basic Linux commands that we can take a look at. So I'll just be giving them a brief overview, and don't worry, you don't need to learn them right now. As we move along the operating system courses and start using it and start making applications on it, you will get used to it. But these are some basics command, the very basic command the beginner should know. So basically the first command is pwd, which stands for print working directory. This is the example of opening Windows File Explorer and seeing on the top bar in which directory you are. Then the next command is cd, which stands for change directory. Most of these commands are self-explanatory. So change directory basically means changing into a different folder. The ls command is for listing or showing everything inside a folder. So basically it's the equivalent of when you double click a folder on Windows and you see everything inside it. That is what the ls command does. Well, then we have the cp and mv command, basically which stand for copy and move. You may realize there is no rename command here. Well, if you think about it, renaming is just moving a file to the same location with a different name. So in Linux, we do not have a rename command, we just have a move command. You can tell Linux to move the file into the same folder with a different name. It may sound confusing at first, I believe you, but trust me, you will get used to it and you will realize how much more it makes sense. Then we have the makedir command, which stands for making a directory or make directory. A directory is basically a folder. So in Windows, you can right click and create new. In here, Linux, you type mkdir and you create a new folder. Well, we have cat and touch. So cat is for concatenate and touch is for modification or creating new files. These are some new commands and there are no direct equivalents of them in Windows. So it might be a little hard to grasp, but imagine concatenate as just double clicking on any file in Notepad. So imagine you had a txt file and you double clicked on it. Well, you can see the text in the Notepad, right? Cat command just does the same. It shows you the output of the file. The next command is touch. So touch can be used to create files in Linux. That is what it is most commonly used for, but it can also be used to change the modification or modification details of a file. For example, you see a text file has been modified 2 years ago and you just want to change the modification date of it. Well, you can always tell Linux to touch the file, and as soon as it touches the file, its modification date will be set to the current date. The last command is clear. So when you are always working on the terminal, it tends to get cluttered up sometimes. So you can use the clear command to clear it up. All right. So I believe that you have got the basics of the terminal commands. Now we'll jump into our Kali Linux system. First of all, the thing we're going to do is we're going to update it. And after that, I'll be giving you a basic